Hey, what's up? It's Jim, and today I'm going to talk about The Girl with All the Gifts. I rarely see a science fiction film or a zombie film or a horror film with as many ideas and as much going on as this film does. It was fairly clear to me very early on in this film that this was probably one of the great zombie movies of like maybe the decade. It's just wondrous in how classically science fiction in terms of its ideas and all the philosophy within it, while also being a really awesome survival zombie film with also lots of world building that goes on all throughout it. It slowly tells you about this world. It doesn't immediately hit you with it. It is very much a thinking man's zombie film, a thinking person's science fiction film where you're going in and you know that there's these ideas there, but it's also trying to do a well-told zombie film in the best sense of the word, in the sense of things like Dawn of the Dead, or even reminded me a little of Day of the Dead, frankly, and the idea of generational things and where humanity fits in and whether humanity should survive, or if later generations should survive, or how you will treat people when you are in this sort of a situation, and in ways that actually makes you think about those things and deal with those things. But as someone who is a fan of these kinds of films, when I finished the film, I was immediately just buzzing with the idea, with the fact that this film was the kind of science fiction and the kind of horror that I absolutely love. The Girl with All the Gifts is rare in the fact that it is so much more interested in telling a very well told, thoughtful kind of science fiction zombie film and really not caring about anything else. It feels very much like a studio controlled kind of zombie film, but also like one that they had faith enough in to make this kind of a movie. It feels that way sort of like in how Train to Busan felt, even though it's a foreign film and this is made in England, felt like you know, how movie studios used to make mainstream movies, I guess. And although mainstream Hollywood zombie film has not really been ultimately that successful, Romero and most of those were independent films, more taking shots at the World War Z's or the Zombielands and such. Girl with All the Gifts plays like an older kind of Hollywood movie with all their faith behind the filmmakers, letting them tell a very well-told story. It has the classicalness of something that Rod Serling could have written. It reminds me of Planet of the Apes in places. It reminds me of all the great science fiction stories that have become great in itself, but it doesn't do that by trying to do those things that have been done before. It's trying to show you different things in a different kind of zombie film. That's what makes this film absolutely so special. Now, I think you'll probably, if you play video games, will say, oh, because there's certain elements to this, and have heard because the zombies are more of a fungal virus thing, and that's part of a video game called The Last of Us. This is based on a book which came out about a year after that game, and supposedly the book and the game were being developed separately and sort of just happened. I'm sure they might make a movie or a TV show out of that game or something, but in this movie, I think let that go, because I think this movie is a really impassionate, strong film. It's on Amazon Prime, so if you have that, you can watch it right now. It got a very quick release, unfortunately. Very quickly in theaters, to be honest. It was released in the UK a year before. The director of this, Colin McCarthy, who has directed things for Peaky Blinders and Doctor Who, and this feels like a really intelligent studio director, one who knows where to put the camera. Not too showy. I think it's very cinematic in certain places, but this feels like a very fine-tuned studio journeyman kind of director, and I mean that as a compliment. I think he does this so excellently well. I do not understand why Hollywood isn't banging down his door like crazy, because this was so well directed with all the performances in this. It shifts from going at the beginning of the film where you have these kids in these wheelchair setup things and an orange kind of hoodie jumpsuit sort of thing, and they're always being wheeled to class guarded by like military soldiers, and then you slowly find out that they're human zombie hybrids basically. You're not exactly sure why they're being educated and what's going on with that. Then the base is attacked, and a little girl, Melanie, who's excellently played by Sonia Nuea, then a group of people try to leave this base that they're on after it is being attacked by various zombies and run away, and those being Patty Constantine, Glenn Close, Sonia Nuea, and Gemma Arterton, after their base has basically been destroyed, and keep moving on and move on even to the outskirts of London trying to find food and a new base camp. So the doctor, played by Glenn Coast can continue doing experiments on Melanie and figuring out more about these zombies to hopefully find a cure. And to be honest, I'm not really giving anything away. This film shifts in tone in certain ways. It's really interesting. I think a lot of films that try to do that ultimately fail, but it does in a very natural way. And I love how you go from, you know, this thing and you're not sure where you are, and it slowly explains it, and it does it in such an interesting way. In certain films you can get away with this, is slowly revealing information like how Melanie happened, how that they are zombies, what's going on with this world. And it's pretty clear that the zombie outbreak has been going on for close to a decade, or a better part of a decade, I'd say. Maybe a little, if it's like maybe a little over, but I wouldn't say too much. And that they've been living in this world. Some parts of information you get, some you don't, but you're always, as a viewer, curious, and that intrigues you and gets you more into it. And as it's telling you all these ideas and doing all these cool, crazy things, you end up being more intrigued as a viewer. I think that's one of the greatest things about this film is, first off, it's very well told and very well done, but you keep wandering in it, and you're not sure everyone's motives, and you're not sure what they're thinking about things, and you're not even sure towards the end of the film if the person you may have been following really had the best intentions overall, or how it works out for some and doesn't work out for others, and the kind of the compromise in the philosophy of life, and how that can have damning effects on some and helping others prosper. And it's really intelligent science fiction. This kind of reminded me of the legendarier episodes of Doctor Who, of classic Doctor Who, where it was more about ideas that would make you think about things about humanity. And this makes me think about that. Think about generational divides and the idea of another generation. It felt like the actors were very much into that. Glenn Close, apparently your sister's a huge zombie fan, so this is kind of a way to pay tribute to her sister as a cameo in this film. And I think definitely this is in the pantheon of great zombie films of this decade. It's really an amazing film. Paddy Constantine does a great performance in this, who you probably know from Hot Fuzz and such, but each of their performances show you that there's more behind what you actually know. Gemma Arterton also the same way, where you're intrigued on what they're thinking, intrigued of how they're processing things. There's not a lot of zombie films where you're thinking about what those people might be thinking, which apparently the book switches perspectives and such, and I could tell that you could do that through a lot of the performances. It almost plays like a well-made kind of prestige Oscar drama in certain ways, particularly with like such an amazing cast and so forth, but not in like the shitty, you know, I had to watch this because it's important way, more in the wow, this is a really well-told, awesome movie that I didn't expect would be as good as it was. And I had heard this movie was good, but I really didn't expect the kind of film it was. It's not made for very much, like $4 million or something, but it has such richness about it. It has more of a world that I'm curious about. Like, honestly, if someone wanted to make a sequel, I wouldn't disagree, as long as it kept this spirit so I could understand this world, and I honestly wouldn't ever want it fully explained to me. A film like this like intrigues you once you get you into that world, and this film has that all throughout it. It's such a rich, amazing zombie film with like a great performance by a young actress who really nails this film. All of the film is almost riding on her. She might have like 3 amazing adult co-stars with her, like with huge resumes, who, you know, definitely can hold a movie on their own anyway, but having to play off of them and almost being, you know, the standout of the whole movie says a lot about her as a performer. It says a lot about this director, Colin McCarthy, that he can make a film like this. I don't think a lot of directors could. They'd want to kind of show off. It's almost like the true showiness of this is the story and the storytelling, and that's something I really like. It has almost an economical screenplay, but it almost feels so dense I don't want to call it economical. It's kind of weird, because when I read in other things people would call it economical, and I go, I guess it actually was, because it only reveals what you need to know, which is something like even greats like John Carpenter and Romero would do. They'd only tell you what you needed to know for that story, and I think this film definitely does that. It might reveal things for a tonal reason or for a character reason later on, but it's only what you need for the story and for the audience. And I really think that's amazing about The Girl with All the Gifts, is it is so purposeful in what it's doing. It's so well mannered and well manicured, and it's interesting to have like a fungal zombie thing. I guess since you guys, most of you watching, to my understanding, play video games and know The Last of Us, but the idea of like you have like fungus like coming out of people's skins, and it's really, really interesting and amazing. I think British science fiction goes into ways that definitely like we will die of at some point, and I like that kind of like very factual, matter-of-fact way to go about it. Like whether it's Doctor Who would always be obsessed like we're gonna get hit with a solar flare, which can happen at any time, so rest easy tonight. And this is actually based on a fungal infection that can get into the brains of ants and is a real thing. It hasn't hurt humans as of yet. It's that kind of matter-of-factness to like classic science fiction that was more about the ideas, because they didn't have the special effects, and certainly they didn't have a huge budget on this, but they make it work so well. There's only a few shots where I noticed like, oh, they had to cover this with like cheaper special effects, but even like there's an overhead shot of a lot of zombies running, and it felt like they copy and pasted a lot of the zombies, but it was almost really beautiful in a lot of ways. A darkness about it, a darkness of what the Earth had become in this world, but also a sort of odd hypnotic quality to it, which I don't think a lot of special effects can do, especially cheaper ones. The music, which is by Cristobal Tapia de Ver, who I'm not very familiar with, but it has kind of a Radiohead-ish, I guess, kind of feel to it, really was interesting and really kept me going through it, and I really loved the score quite a bit. I love different kinds of scores. I feel like we're moving to a place where it's more common to have all sorts of different kinds of scores, and I felt like this score is just really interesting in that, because it kind of makes you feel like you're in this unnatural, weird dimension, but also natural, because it sounds like something you've heard before from Radiohead or something, but he twists it in a certain way that I think really works for this film, and certainly makes it feel rather British. I think this is probably one of my favorite British films I've seen in a while, and what I like about this film and what I like about most horror films is horror and science fiction work best in the crux of having ideas. And if you have a film that has great, amazing ideas and makes you think about philosophy and think about the ideas of man, you can really make a really dense, beautiful science fiction or horror film. This is a film that reminds me a lot more of The Day the Earth Stood Still than it does The Walking Dead, and that to me is really awesome. That's something I really want from my science fiction and from my horror films. That's something I definitely want from them, because I want that beautiful, that thing that makes me think about the nature of humanity and makes me think about the ideas within it. I kept thinking of Planet of the Apes, particularly toward the end of this film. The idea of disagreeing on philosophy, having an ending that can be considered a bummer ending but also a hopeful ending, and the idea of hope and tragedy, and the idea that, you know, one decision for one person may not be good for the other person. You know, one thing that helps rejuvenate certain people will condemn another, and the philosophical ideas of how to handle a zombie outbreak, how far it's gone. You don't actually know if it's gone beyond England, you know, and I love that they don't really get into that, and they don't need to. This is the kind of economical, well-made storytelling that comes through filmmaking that I absolutely love. If you're a genre fan and a horror fan, and frankly just a movie fan, this is a phenomenal piece of work, and definitely one of the best movies I've seen this year. It's like if you watch an older film that you know is a classic, and the whole time you're watching it you're like, oh, this is a fucking classic, it makes sense, it's so good. And The Girl with All the Gifts made me feel that way throughout. It was not because I had heard this was very good, it was because immediately the storytelling and how they revealed things and how the film played out, it would constantly surprise me and shift, and I never got bored and went, oh, I know how this is going to go. I never knew how it was going to go. I really didn't. It really didn't feel like another story to me. It might share similarities to The Last of Us, but this is a wholly original, deeply philosophical, interesting, beautiful zombie film. You go into this film maybe just not sure what you're getting into, and the film makes you feel that way throughout it, but it keeps surprising you and twisting and turning and rewarding you as an audience member in ways that I haven't really seen from a lot of films, and honestly haven't seen from really any films as beautiful and as strong as this film does. I'm incredibly interested what this director has coming up next. I am instantly a fan of him, and I'm probably 100% going to watch this again. This has immediately become probably one of my newer favorite films, and a film that makes me happy about filmmaking in this decade, and reminds me of the greatness that science fiction and horror can achieve when talking about such ideas, while also making an incredibly entertaining and depressing statement all at the same time. So if you have seen The Girl with All the Gifts and you would like to talk about it, then comment below in the comments and subscribe if you would like to.